Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Back to the Basics live stream. We are super excited tonight because we have two brand new 2025 IOCDF advocates who are going to share their stories and share a little bit about their own kind of back to basics journey with OCD and ERP and all of the things. But before we jump into that, feel free as folks come in to say hello and tell us where you're watching from in the chat as y'all pop in. And while folks are joining us, I do want to note that this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you're in crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access online at www.988lifeline.org. Go to your local emergency room or call 911. And finally, we want to create a safe space. We want to be kind and respectful to everyone. And we want everyone, of course, to keep that in mind as you're commenting in the chat, because as y'all show up in the chat here tonight, you are advocating, you are supporting one another. We want to do that with kindness and respect and with affirmation. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to support one another on this journey with life and OCD and all of the things. But I note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and is being recorded. So also please keep that in mind as you comment. But so glad that folks are already joining us. I see Mike, hi Mike, and Spence and Wiley. So welcome y'all. So good to see you with us tonight. Want to go ahead and kind of jump right in tonight with Jonathan and David here. And I'm just going to ask each of you to share a little bit about yourselves and about your journey with OCD and all of the things, and maybe even what kind of brought you to IOCDF and wanting to advocate. So as much or as little as you want to share with us about yourself and your OCD story. So Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to share my story and be here. So my journey, like many people in the OCD community, started when I was a child, but didn't necessarily know that my story was starting. It was a lot of worrying about things, just being a kid, not sure about, how things were going or, what I could expect. It began with a lot of medical things. I remember being as a kid just so uncertain about, diseases or medical conditions. I would see something as a kid. I remember there was a time where I saw an ad for hepatitis C in a magazine, and I was convinced that I had hepatitis C. And then there was, I heard somewhere about internal bleeding in a movie or something, and I was convinced that I was always going to have internal bleeding. And there was no way to check or reassure. So I would ask for reassurance from my parents. I would ask for reassurance. I would kind of mention things maybe around family members, hoping they could give me some sort of inkling on it. And it was like that throughout childhood. And then, when I was in high school, there was, I need to do things a certain amount of times. I remember I had to touch things 3 times. I worked at a grocery store, and part of my job was making things even on the shelves. And, I remember if I didn't make it perfectly even, then something was going to happen to a family member, or my day was going to be. Yeah. And, so that idea of like, this doesn't feel right, but I don't know, maybe it's just something that happens to people. But again, like many in the OCD community, it came to a.
We may have froze. Okay, we're going to give Jonathan just a second to pop back in. Jonathan is so
I was like 25.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, you froze. Okay, so yeah, rewind for us just like a minute. And
no. So I went to school like many. My story started when I was 18. Officially, I was about 25 miles from school. From home, I commuted to college, and all of a sudden, just one day, drove around the parking lot and went, "Did I hit somebody?" Mm-hmm. I felt something on my car. And I know, I'm sure there's many shaking. You're shaking your head. A lot of people know this feeling. And then the horse was out of the barn. The train was out of the station. there were times I would drive 10 minutes. There were times I would drive 20 minutes and I would go back to the lot and back to the lot. And a 10-minute, drive to the store became a 30-minute drive to the store. And in that car, the steering wheel, the leather on my steering wheel was actually loose and torn from the actual wheel from me gripping it so much. And I knew it was bad when I would drive over a bridge, pay a toll, and then go back just to see. And, that's where it was like this is not now something that I'm worrying about. I can't function. I'm having a lot of issues with it, constantly torn up by these feelings. Then, my now wife, my college girlfriend, she kind of let on like something doesn't seem right, that you get worried about these things. And, that's when my treatment began. I didn't do ERP right away. I went to a talk therapist, and that got me only so far. But then, of course, like everybody, you think you're doing fine. And then I just was on medicine. I was getting medicine from my general practitioner, and I just went kind of on my way. And I started getting more into, and my OCD has run the parameter from things from, body dysmorphia to scrupulosity to contamination. And I still deal with all those things. But I got addicted to purchasing sneakers, and I had to find the perfect running sneaker. And, I ran 5Ks, and then, well, that's not good enough. So let's run marathons. That's not good enough. Let's do triathlons. That's not good enough. Let's be an Ironman. I did it once. That's not good enough. You got to do it twice. And in that process, it was just, how am I going to get faster? How am I going to get thinner? How am I going to get stronger? And with each movement, I was spending money, and the sneakers were coming in. They couldn't come in. I couldn't get them out fast enough as they were coming in. And that's when I began ERP. My wife said that this is something that you need to work through, because you're only hurting yourself. And she's been my biggest supporter along the way with my rest of my family. And, that led me to, when I just started that ERP, I decided I wasn't going to hide it anymore. And I raised money for a local support system for children who were dealing with bereavement issues. It was someone who ran it that I was friends with. And I just decided, I can't hide this anymore. So I told everybody. I wrote a post, and it's on social media. I said, I'm tired of hiding it. I have a mental disease. And it definitely helped. I've had my ups and downs since, but that led me to advocacy. I decided I no longer wanted to just sit back. And I'm a storyteller. I worked in the news business as a writer and a producer. And I said, well, if I could tell stories in my story, I don't care if I help 5 people, it's worth it, because early intervention, as we know, is key. I'm fortunate enough. My 14-year-old daughter has OCD. We caught it at 6 years old.
Oh, that's awesome.
Where she is now, she's not going to experience what I experienced when I went to college, because it just wasn't known. We didn't talk about it. So but we jumped in. So that's how I got to advocacy. And that's my story.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And I echo what Mike said in the chat. So powerful. And I know Beth really resonated with all the time spent. I think that was in reference to even the driving back in the midst of hit and run OCD. And Stephanie, in order to join the conversation, for anybody who's asking, you can just comment right here on either YouTube or Facebook. We have kind of two different conversations going on in both spaces, but you can ask any questions there, and I will make sure that we get to ask our awesome advocates here. But Jonathan, just thank you for sharing. And I knew aspects kind of your story. And this was just real. We actually have so much in common. I have so many things I just want to ask you.
And it's we all do this. And I was saying to somebody, and I can't wait to hear what David has to say, but I was telling someone recently, like, if you have, asthma, you have a torn ACL, you have these things, there's kind of there's a lane for it. But we all have OCD. We have so many different things going on. The things that could keep you up for weeks, I will say, what, the other day I threw out my lunch because I was worried that it got contaminated, but a week before I would have eaten it off the ground. I mean, that's where it's that discussion part of it.
Mm-hmm. And I love, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but I love what you mentioned, that whatever themes are significant, it's so interesting because it feels like the worst thing in the world, whatever it is that we're stuck on. And it tends to feel like we'll talk to somebody else and it's like, man, I wish I had that theme. But it's because ours is the one that's the most significant. But thank you so much for sharing. And I'm excited to continue to dive in. And David, I would love to ask you kind of the same thing of just as much or as little as you want to share with us to tell us a little bit about your OCD journey and your story and who you are and what brought you into advocacy.
Yeah. So firstly, thank you, Jonathan. And also thank you guys for having me. So my story kind of started off when I was in middle school. So kind of later in middle school, I got these new white shoes and I was really excited to have them because they were like high top Pumas. And I was a sneakerhead back in the day. And now I'm not anymore because I actually have to spend my own money on them. But anyways, yeah, so they were brand new, all white, and they had little holes in them, like little pores to allow for breathability. And that wasn't great when they got dirty. So I was playing soccer one day with my friends, and it was very muddy. It was raining the day before, and we had like this area that we played soccer in, and they got really muddy. And then I had to clean them. And I cleaned shoes before for like many months and years because I was into sneakers. But then for some reason that one day, because they were so dirty, they were so new, and they're exactly what I wanted. I cleaned them, but then I saw another spot and I had to clean them again. And then there was nothing on them, but I cleaned them and cleaned them and cleaned them. And then that really kicked off like my journey with OCD. So I was really first started off with contamination, anything contamination related. It got so bad to the point where I remember, and like kind of perfectionism, where I couldn't even enter my own bedroom after I slept downstairs instead of my own bedroom because I didn't want to touch my bed. I didn't want to touch the closet. And after that kind of certain point, that's when I asked my parents, oh, like, what do you think? Like, do you think I have OCD? I've heard of the condition. It was the closest thing that resonated with me. But they weren't the most kind of outright like accepting of it right away. But then they looked into it, and a couple months later, we decided to get therapy. So I started off with like Jonathan talk therapy, which wasn't the most helpful. And then I went to a hypnotherapist. This is also before I knew about ERP, but I went to a hypnotherapist and it wasn't the most helpful because I wasn't being exposed to things, which I needed, especially for the contamination. And I joined NOCD because I saw an ad about them somewhere. And that really, my therapist, her name was Catherine. She was amazing, fantastic. It was virtual. I had my doubts because I was like, how much can a therapist do virtually, especially for such a physical kind of outlook on my condition. So, but then like we walked through it, we set up a kind of a lateral hierarchy, and it really helped. And it was very tough. It was tough in the beginning. It was like I was very close to giving up, but with the support of family, my girlfriend now, very supportive. That has been great. I didn't take any medication, but the therapy itself, it lasted about 3-4 months. And then kind of it tapered off slowly. And then ever since then, I've been kind of using some of the tools. But to this day, I mean, there's some times where I just have to do my bed for an extended period of time. And I just have to kind of, zoom out and be like, okay, it will all be okay. It's okay to sit in the discomfort. And it's always kind of therapy kind of helps you gain the tools to deal with the condition, but not the symptoms they're always there to some level, but it's much easier to deal with. So, and yeah, I wrote a blog post for NOCD because I wanted more people to read the story, but also myself, like it took years to find NOCD and IOCDF and any of these organizations. So I joined IOCDF also to help kind of promote just awareness and disseminate any information, and anything on the website really resonates. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, David. And I think so many people resonate. I saw even early on in your story, Wiley was saying that the onset of contamination just a lot of times it just is so sudden and you're like, how was I even living beforehand in the same conditions? And where does this come from? Just all of it. And it can feel so intense. And I love that you named, because I think so many people here can relate to this. I know I can, with going to types of therapy that might be effective for other disorders, but are not evidence-based treatments for OCD and are not helpful, like talk therapy and hypnotherapy with maybe really well-meaning providers, but a lot of times we get worse until we end up kind of in the right treatment. So glad that you found OCD and got to do ERP, and even the experience. I think it's so neat that you got to share. The research is pretty awesome right now on the fact that you can do telehealth and it can be just as effective as in person, especially because you're doing exposures kind of in your own environment. So just really, really cool.
I remember like my therapist, she made me like point my camera at my closet. She made me just disorient certain things and then just sit there. And I was like, this lady is like, yeah. But then it really, like, she made me sit there with her for 5 minutes. And she said, maybe it's dirty, maybe it's not. And I was like, well, that's great. But yeah, but then after time, we just extended the amount of time. And at some point it was, so.
I love that. And again, there's something kind of neat about being able to do teletherapy in your environment where this stuff is actually happening and where you're feeling kind of that contamination.
Yes.
And just love that you had that support and have so much support of your family and your girlfriend. So thank you. Well, I want us to kind of get into a little bit more of kind of how y'all would define OCD and ERP and things like that, especially just from the lived experience perspective. But I also want to highlight that. Thank you at 714 for highlighting. I think when OCD tries to blame us for really challenging things, where often OCD, I think for a lot of people, will say, you need to do this compulsion or something bad will happen. And where sometimes life things come up that are challenging, OCD will say, this is your fault. And it's not. For those who know my story, that was very much my experience. I blamed myself for deaths and losses and all sorts of things. And OCD wants us to stay stuck. So I'm so proud of you for continuing on with ERP, regardless of what your OCD said, Beth. That's awesome. So much love in the chat. Love, love, love. Well, so I want to ask y'all just a couple different things. How would you define OCD? How would you define obsessions and compulsions, just based on your experience? And how does that differ from what we might see in the media or common misunderstanding? So I'll head back over to you, Jonathan. How do you define it? And what do we maybe think it is based on the media versus what it actually is?
Yeah, definitely. I just have to say, funny note, David, the therapist that changed my life is also named Catherine.
Yes.
So, and I'm still with her, and she changed my life. So,
shout out to the Catherines.
Yeah, definitely. So I once wrote, I would do these posts around OCD Awareness Week in October, and I once described OCD as someone who shows up to the party, grabs control of the stereo, and puts on the worst music ever. And you can't stop listening to it. And it's stuck in your head, and you keep singing these songs. And every time you hope they would change the record, it winds up being put back on. And you can't do anything. And you could tell them to leave the party, but you, for some reason, every time you walk up to tell them to leave the party, you just let them keep doing it. And I mean, it's not as simple as that, but I think it's, for me, when I try to explain people life with OCD is like, I say, when you have 5 thoughts on something, there's a good chance I've had 50 on it. And after those thoughts, I've also deal with a ramification of emotions that you shouldn't coordinate with those thoughts. You know, part of my problem now is I judge everything as pass or fail. So if I went out to a great restaurant and had an amazing meal, you may think, oh man, I'm full. I probably could have cut back before the last few bites. I say you failed that meal. You should have stopped earlier. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a glutton, and now the thoughts are going the whole time I'm on the way home. So it's unwelcome thoughts is the best thing to say. But also, as you said, you worry that, a family member could die because you didn't do something. There are these ramifications and these outcomes that do not fit the crime. Like there should be no punishment to fit the crime, and you're creating the worst punishment for the crime. So that's really what I explain. And, you know, I understand what David was saying about the sneakers. That is something that I'm also a sneakerhead, so I get it. And
I love that we heard like the sneaker connection across both of your stories.
I appreciate, because look, I'm neat. I know I'm neat. My house is immaculate. I mean, you know, my messy is, you know, the average person's clean, and I get that, but that does not define my OCD. And I think that is so much of what is the misconception. You know, one of the worst conversations I ever had was someone flat out said to me, they're like, well, what's your number? I'm like, well, what do you mean what's my number? And they said, well, how many times do you have to do things because you have OCD? I was like, that is so disheartening, because it's not like you go to it's not like a deli counter where I go, oh, my number's 6. I'm gonna do everything 6 times. So I think that those are the misconceptions, you know, that we are just these neat people who like things straight and even, and we fold our napkins, and, you know, we just walk into a room and make sure everything's lined up. I mean, you know, I'm at a hotel desk right now. There's things all over the place. So how is that possible? So that's how I define it. The unwanted thoughts with unwanted circumstances.
Thank you so much. And hi, Ashton. Welcome. So many awesome humans here in the chat. Thank you for sharing. And I think what you're describing too, yeah, I mean, we get these obsessions, we get these intrusive thoughts, and the ramifications, our brain creates all of this kind of around it, where yes, we get the fear or the guilt or the shame or the regret that Cash is talking about in the chat. And it's like, oof, I can't live with this. I can't sit with any of this. I have to do this compulsion to get rid of these really difficult feelings, or to make it so these ramifications kind of don't happen. And it's also distorted. And I think it's so painful, like you just described, where, often folks think it's that individuals like things organized or like to do things in a particular way, when everything about OCD is ego dystonic and directly against everything we care about. So David, I know you spoke to this in your story too, but would love to hear from you, kind of how you define OCD and how that might be different from what we typically hear in the media.
Yeah, I have a visualization just in my head of it. Just a thought or kind of feeling or anything that's very sticky and just sticks on the brain. It just sticks there. And no matter, like, you just, you try to get rid of it in some shape or form by doing obsessions, maybe. It lessens it, but the fact is it's still there because it's so sticky. So I think that's like the most like metaphorical way of describing it. But yeah, I definitely think it's kind of a combination of obsessions and or compulsions. And it's also a vicious cycle. It's kind of a positive loop. So, you have some kind of intrusive thought, feeling, urge, and you do something to mitigate that. And then that kind of validifies what came in as sticky. So it just adds to the stickiness, which makes you even feel even worse. And you just go deeper and deeper. And I think that's very, very, like Jonathan said, a very stark contrast compared to the media, where people say like, I'm so OCD, or it's like some people, I mean, there's who say like, it must be nice to have OCD. Like it's a good personality trait, because the people are so efficient, they're so productive, they align stuff perfectly, they never lose things, which is like, yeah, complete 180 compared to what the condition actually is. So yeah.
Yeah, I always tell folks there's no point in my life where I've been like, my OCD is so helpful. It's like, no, it's painful and taking everything away from me.
Yes.
No, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was going to say, you said about forget, like, ask me how many times I forget to take medicine or, bring something or, and then what'll happen is you'll then have to do the compulsions to make up for the fact that you forgot it. So if OCD is that perfect, we wouldn't go down that road.
Yeah.
And often can even make us forget actually things that are really important in our lives, because we're so stuck in our head and not actually existing in the world around us. I always say there's been so many things that I've neglected to do or forgotten that were significant because I was so busy trying to solve a problem that didn't actually need to be solved in the midst of this kind of sticky brain. And I love the sticky piece that David described. And then Jonathan, what you were saying reminded me, I always think about in our mind, often when we're ruminating with OCD, it's kind of like we are the jury, the judge, we are the one on trial, we are all of those different things. And we're trying to prove that we did something wrong and that we didn't do something wrong, kind of all at the same time. And there's just not an escape to that.
No. And you know, I would David, you nailed on the head when you say people are like, oh, you should love having OCD. But this is not an exaggeration. I think I spent 90 seconds on the decision to purchase my car 5 years ago. I maybe spent 75 seconds on purchasing my home. Mm-hmm. I probably spent hours on the internet last week researching concussions because I hit my head. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's part of it. You know, it accumulates. You do it, but there's no, you know, that's the thing about being sticky. That stuck on my brain. The house was like, oh yeah, it's a nice house, I'll get it. Yeah. You know, but the brain with an OCD brain just finds those things and sticks on it. When you said to your point about ruminating, and then you're like, I don't even remember what we watched this show last year. Like, what? Probably because I was in a compulsion when we watched it, or, you know, in a rumination. It really does rob you. And then you, to your point, you then try to, you know, convict the brain and, you know, punish the brain and then carry out that punishment.
Absolutely. Gosh, everything that you just said, just like 100%. And Cash is so right too. It's as you've tried to express since the 90s, Cash, OCD is not Monica from Friends. It's not something that's helpful in any way, shape, or form throughout our lives. So I think this is really awesome. I love the analogies that y'all are using too, and would love to kind of take it a step further and ask specifically about treatment. You both mentioned this a little bit in your stories, but I would love to hear a little bit more about what ERP looked like for you, and also maybe what was challenging, what was helpful about it. And I always like to preface with kind of these back to the basic streams for folks who are listening. Exposure and response prevention is the gold standard treatment for OCD, and it falls under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy. And we typically are talking about someone being exposed to things that evoke the same discomfort that OCD evokes. But the response prevention is really the key. It's always little e and big RP, where at the same time, we're being encouraged to not engage in the compulsion. And in doing that, we get to make OCD a lot smaller. So I'm curious, David, for you, what did maybe the exposure part look like, but also what did that response prevention part look like that can be, that much harder?
Yeah. So mine was virtual, and I talked about the contamination part, but also a significant portion, mainly even today, a main significant portion would be relationship OCD, where so my previous relationship and my current one, just exposing. So we made, like, with my therapist, we made like a ladder or a hierarchy through the NOCD app, and 10 would be like the hardest, most like anxiety inducing kind of exposure, and 1 would be the easiest. And the goal is to get near the middle. So we start off near like 5 or 6. So at the time, it was like, in terms of the relationship, it was like, we didn't start off with like, maybe you don't love your partner. That would like send me somewhere else. But I started off with like, maybe you shouldn't visit this person this weekend, and it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it does. It was really like just sitting in my room and being okay with sitting there. That was kind of the midpoint of that contamination. And then after that, we kind of gradually increased the difficulty with mixing in some of the previous, also to make sure that, there wasn't any loss also of progress. And then sometimes there was progress loss, which is also completely normal. It's very tough to go through the actual exposure. And then, so I got exposed to it maybe for a couple of minutes. And then next week it was like, instead of 5 minutes, it was 10 minutes. Then next week it was 15 minutes. And then after 40 minutes, it really kind of blends into an hour, 2 hours. You don't really feel the need to do it anymore as much in that time. But then outside of therapy, that's when the urges came back to not go to the room. So then my homework a few weeks later was go into the room without my supervision, which was another kind of step because she wasn't there as support. my therapist. So I just went in there, and then I told her the next time that I did that, which is kind of, it was its own motivation because I could tell her that I accomplished that. I could tell my parents that. And yeah, so that's kind of, in terms of contamination and relationship, that's mainly how it went. And I still use those tools today. I try to, even though it's sometimes very tough to, you need to. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it becomes, and I'm so glad you're normalizing that. We continue to use our skills and tools each and every day, even in recovery. And I always tell folks that's how we keep OCD out of the driver's seat. And it doesn't mean that it's always as hard as it was at the beginning or in treatment. It is so possible to live a big, beautiful, joyful, awesome life where OCD isn't, isn't directing it. But we get to use our skills and tools for that. And stuff does pop up, even like Jonathan mentioned with kind of the concussion piece and things this week. And which is so, Jonathan, you're so similar. Also, it's funny, you're similar to both me and to my partner, Ethan, who a lot of folks know because he is terrified of also getting a concussion. And I think it was on our honeymoon, we got on the ride. There's a very long story. We've tried our honeymoon multiple times. We finally got to go on it because we got sick and got COVID every time we tried to go on it. But the first time we were trying it, we went to Disney at the beginning and we got on the Peter Pan ride that he was so excited about. And he hit his head on the sail. And the rest of that day, it was, what if I got a concussion? And how can I possibly enjoy Disney if I got a concussion or if I have
on a roller coaster?
Yeah, I mean, it's all those things. But I think, for him, we always talk about those moments come up and then how do we use kind of our skills and tools in the moment. So I'd love to hear from you. What did that ERP journey look like? And then what does it look like to continue to use those kind of response prevention tools now?
Yeah, exactly. And on the concussion front, that's been something that has always, not pun intended, been on my mind since I was a kid, because someone had gotten one when I was in grammar school. And I remember they said, oh, the doctor made me do this. So I've been doing that my whole life. And my wife saw me the other day do it. And she goes, why are you doing that? And I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I did it. It's a compulsion. So ERP for me has always, my OCD, I call it bouncy, which is, my therapist loves that term because it goes from body dysmorphia to obsessive sexual thoughts to, it's not always one thing. But with the sneakers, as I mentioned, that was what drew me into ERP. It was just stop buying sneakers. And, wife has to check the credit card, make sure, she was aware of it and be accountable for it and just say like, I'm not researching and kind of just own up to it. And then, we would tackle things as they came along. When it, body dysmorphia, we're constantly worrying about my weight. I pinch a lot, counting how many times I pinch, kind of like what David said with your timing things out, all right, did you pinch 50 times today? Did you pinch 20? Hiding the scale, just saying like, I can't go on the scale. And then being in the bedroom, knowing the scale is there and starting to get that cold sweat of what is that number now? Has it gone up or down? And just kind of, to use your term, sticking with the ick, just saying like, this is terrible, but I gotta go through it. And like with the concussion, my ERP didn't work. It's having those feelings and not going on the internet, not searching, or saying I'm only going to search for 10 minutes. I'm giving myself 10 minutes to search. And then the next time make it 5 minutes to search. Mm-hmm. So that's really been my journey because of the fact that, it has become bouncy. But the biggest ERP was not seeking reassurance, because that is my ultimate compulsion. And my wife Bridget is I really like, she's my North Star with my help of getting, through this. And I would just ask her constantly, check this meat. Does this look okay? Do you think this milk's been let out too long? And just knowing that if I asked her, she's not going to give me an answer, because I had to go to her and say, you can't give me answers anymore. Like, I could tell you. So that's been a big part of the ERP, is just, knowing I'm not going to get anywhere, but also last week saying, I hit my head, I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm going to have to get through it. So it's not as, it doesn't always have like a tangible feel to my ERP. It's really just applying it. Like last week, I'm like I said, I'm neat. Sometimes the bed's not made the way I want. Just walking in and looking at it and going, I have to leave this room. I know the bed's not made the way I want, but the day will go on. I know the couch cushions haven't been arranged the way I want. The day will go on. I don't like the way this sandwich looks, but I have to eat it and I'll be okay. So it's a lot of just taking it head on in that moment.
Yeah. Being able to just say, okay, I can handle this discomfort and I can still step forward with my day. Like
Exactly.
I can sit with this. I don't have to get rid of it. It can exist right now. I want to kind of hang with you for a second on the piece you asked about reassurance, because I think that's so challenging for so many, where often a huge compulsion for so many is seeking reassurance, whether it's from friends or family members or a religious leader, or it can take or now Google, or honestly, a lot of people seek reassurance from ChatGPT, not calling anyone out in the chat. But if that is something that you are navigating right now, you are not alone, because I think that's become something really challenging. But with that, for you, I know you said you were navigating that with your family. What did support look like from your family? And like I was going to say, if there are family members who are listening tonight, how can they support without offering reassurance in the midst of that journey?
So
I think helpful for you. I know.
Yeah, I think the biggest support is listening. We have a phrase in my house because, again, my wife, the saint, has to deal with it from my daughter too. But we have a phrase in my house that says, my OCD is tough today. And we've given OCD. So there's 3 people in my house, but there's 5 because it's my OCD and my daughter's OCD. We've given it a kind of a characteristic because that helps remove it from us, that this is not my brain. It's my OCD. Mm-hmm. So if I say that out loud, that automatically knows, okay, the questions that are coming out for reassurance are not him. They're my OCD. If there's OCD or her OCD. And the way to do it is just to tread lightly, to not ignore, because that would be the issue. She would say nothing and I get mad, and because a lot of times my anxiety will turn to anger and I get mad. Well, you don't care about my OCD, or you're downplaying what I'm dealing with. But it's okay. I get it. I understand why you feel that way. That's tough. It's scary if meat's undercooked, but it's something that we'll deal with. And just that acknowledgement of it does help. And I think that's what, for myself, and I don't know if David and you could say the same, but it just, this is abnormal to a degree. You feel abnormal with it, but you don't want to feel like you're an outcast. So it's just like, look, this is what I deal with. I can't control it. I think that's always the thing. So it's make it that, like, I get you don't want to do this. You don't want to be sitting here sweating over your dinner that it's undercooked. Or that your closet's messy, I get it. And I'm here to support you. And how can I do it? So I think it's just the listening piece of it. We also, humor is a huge part in my house. When I'm having a tough day and I could realize it, I say this to my wife and I go, I don't know if you know this, but I have OCD. And she's like, wait, really? And that kind of just breaks the ice. And it makes us feel like, okay, we can beat this. Like, we can get through this night. And look, I'm not going to lie. It's never perfect, but it really is. The reassurance, once we went through that, it was a game changer in our house, in the way I deal with OCD. It's like, look, we're putting it out there. We're telling you what it is. And now we can kind of navigate it. So I think that's, to answer your question about reassurance and family members, I think it's just listening, but not feeding into it, not sitting there Googling like, okay, well, let's look up what a concussion would be, because that does nothing. Now you're just acting on my compulsions with me. So I think that's what it is.
Yeah. And I love the way that you talked about even externalizing it. And I know for some people that might be naming it, and that can take on all different forms. And I think it's such a great diffusion technique of being able to say, oh, okay, I can look at the thought as opposed to from the thought. I can say, oh, I notice I'm having these intrusive thoughts, and that doesn't define me. And I love that you're kind of seeing the OCD as this external component. I think that's so powerful. And Phyllis, I love what Phyllis, she just gave you a compliment here. So relatable, Jonathan. So thank you. David, would love to hear from you. Also, what's helpful for you from family members or from your girlfriend on the OCD journey to maybe offer support without reassurance or accommodation?
Yeah, I think the most what someone wants to do for someone when they see someone going through OCD is to kind of get them through the compulsion, right? Just work with them, do the compulsion with them, be very quick. And if they reassure you, then you're getting past it quicker. But getting past it quicker always leads is just a circle. So you just get back to the same point quicker. You get the again same exact obsession quicker. So I think like what kind of a family member, a very close person can do best is just to listen to the person and kind of validate the idea that they're going through something tough, and that there's like, if they're at the stage at that point, like resources out there, and maybe point them in some kind of direction, do research on what help there is, but not helping them with the current compulsion slash obsession that they're going through, because that's not my parents. They try to do that, and other people also try to do that, and sometimes that happens. That's completely normal, because they also, I mean, it's hard as a person from the outside who's not living with it, but is like trying to help someone that's going through it, just to sit back and be like, it's like just to resist any kind of wanting to help or get them through it. So I think it takes learning from both ends, but at the just same time, it's important to just, like Jonathan said, just really take a step back and just kind of validate, be there for them, but don't engage in their what they would call a vicious cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it, that we can be there for them without necessarily getting into the content or continuing that merry-go-round. And I think that's so important. And I think, we always say, a lot of y'all know my partner, Ethan, which we also find humor actually a lot. I know lots of folks laughed at us actually right here a week ago when Ethan muted me for doing a compulsion on the live stream. So if y'all have not watched that reel, feel free to go back and do that. But it's a whole sidebar. But in our house, we always say we can validate the feeling and affirm the feeling without going into the content. So it's like, ugh, this sucks. I know you feel so guilty right now. I know you feel so anxious. I know OCD is just so heavy. We're not going to talk about the content. I know that feels really scary. I'm not going to help you with that, but I can sit with you in the midst of this emotion. And I think for the person with OCD, sometimes that can be frustrating because you're like, no, I want to talk about the content. Yeah. And at the same time, I think it's actually the OCD getting frustrated that it wants to talk about the content, where we can just get support with the emotion.
Yeah, and you think you can outsmart somebody. If I ask it this way, maybe I'm not asking it directly, but like, what do you you're trying to sneak it in there, hoping that they'll somehow drop you. Like, all right, so that is okay. I got it.
We're so sneaky, and it's Ethan and I know each other too well now, because I will hear him do that even when we're with friends. I'm like, come on, like, are you really going to be that obvious? Like, at least try a little harder to be discreet. I love this. Well, I would love to ask, we're talking about discomfort too, and the discomfort that comes up around OCD, and even our loved ones supporting us in the midst of those uncomfortable emotions. And I think often when we think of OCD, our immediate thought is, anxiety. But we've talked about a lot of different types of discomfort already tonight that come up. And I wonder, Jonathan, for you, what is discomfort? What kind of forms has discomfort taken? And what has that been like for you? How have you navigated that? Because I think it can be super hard and nuanced.
I mentioned that, of course, anxiety. I mean, there's always the anxiety that deals with it. A lot of times when I'm unsure why I'm anxious, it does turn to anger, and then that I shut in, and I'll get just really cranky, and just want to isolate. But the biggest feeling is I used to call it guilt, but I've renamed it. It is shame. I sit in shame. If I sleep till 9 o'clock, shame. It's beautiful weather today where I am, and I didn't run this morning, and I didn't earn that. You didn't earn the right to be outside in the beautiful weather because you had to have worked out first. So it's that shame that, well, you could have done better. It's always earning everything. And when I don't earn it, it's shame. And that could be, a night out with friends for dinner, or it could be going to an event. But it is, the shame is really hard, because what we mentioned earlier, as you said, like, you're the judge, jury, and executioner, that there's really no need for it. I mean, there's no reason you should feel shame because you didn't, find the perfect running sneaker, or you got a little stain on your shirt. So I deal with that the most, and I think that's something that, like you said, the emotions that people don't necessarily deal with or expect with OCD. But I used to call it guilt, but guilt. My therapist, it empowered me when she said guilt would mean that you did something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that you should feel guilty if you skipped work to go running, but you shouldn't feel shame. So you're feeling shame. You shouldn't feel guilt because you decided to, sleep until 9 o'clock after, you were up late last night, and even if you were up late because you were, I play video games, late when I shouldn't, or you're watching TV, you did nothing wrong.
Mm-mm.
You're not being, you shouldn't feel that's shame. That's not guilt. Sorry to confuse. That's where I would deal with it. So that's my number one emotion that I have to deal with, is shame.
No, thank you for naming that. No, I was hoping we'd kind of get into the guilt or the shame piece, because I think it's so common. That's what I see a lot with folks navigating scrupulosity. That's been kind of my common piece. And often with OCD, we jump from, guilt of, oh, I've done something wrong, which is so normal for us to feel when we've actually done something wrong. With OCD, we think we did something wrong when we didn't actually do anything wrong. But we jump into shame, which is not, oh, I made a mistake. It's, I am bad. Not I did something wrong, but I am wrong. I am bad. I am a bad person. I'm defined in that way. And it's so painful, because I think, I think so often we get pulled, and you can tell me if you resonate with this, but I think so often we get pulled into the compulsion, because it's like, well, if I'm not doing the right thing, or if I'm not a quote unquote good person, then who am I? And there's an identity piece in that.
Yeah. And I mentioned scrupulosity early. I was raised, and I still am a devout Catholic. I was raised in a Catholic household, but I struggled big time. I mean, I was, like, again, many people with OCD, I was convinced I sold my soul to the devil for a good year of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept it to myself, but I would find those ways to ask questions about it. And I think that is what put in the guilt part of it, because I was always convinced that there's always, at the very end of the day, all these things are going to add up, and I'm going to be internally damned. So, and I stepped away from my faith for a while, because I was like, well, I got to avoid it so that way I don't have to worry about it. But so it's that guilt that you come back to, of like, well, I have to do this right, because if not, I'm going to wind up being cursed because of it. And it's like, it's like digging in the sand with a teaspoon, and then all of a sudden you have a great big pile. So you're like, well, if I slept in and I didn't work out, then I might get fat. And if I get fat, then I'm going to die early. And then if I die early, I'll meet my maker early. And I didn't do everything else right. So I got to make sure I got to do this.
Yeah. It goes like, it spirals so quick.
It's like all these things, it just spirals out. And that comes back to where that's where the guilt part of it is, and that's how it spills out. And, it's ridiculous. And like, like you just heard me, I made that jump from like eating something to all of a sudden I'm going to die. Like there's no rhyme or reason to that, but that's what the OCD brain decides. Then the compulsions come in, and that's where the shame comes in.
Oh yeah. I used to, when I was in school chaplaincy, when I was really struggling with my OCD, it used to go from, oh, what if I made this mistake in the classroom? And then somehow, like within 10 seconds, it was, and I'm laying in a ditch somewhere and I'm in jail and I'm burning in hell. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I'll end this. Yeah. And I'll end this call, and I'll think of everything I probably worried I said wrong, and that I'm going to get an email tomorrow from the IOCDF and saying, forget it. You're out, but that's what you said. Like,
well, I've been thinking they were going to fire me from volunteering since 2020, and I'm still here 5 years later, so we're good. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Emilio, in the back, for listening to us. No, but Jonathan, just thank you so much, because I think that it resonates so deeply. And even the pieces you talked about with scrupulosity, I want folks who are listening to hear I think I've had that conversation like 5 times today just about scrup, because this comes up. It feels so scary. And OCD jumps to the worst possible thing we can imagine with life and with faith and with finality and just all of these things. So, David, I would love to hear from you too. What is, we would never fire you. Thank you, Emilio. I love y'all. I don't know. Last week when I did a compulsion on air and Ethan muted me, I was like, oh gosh. But thank you. David, would love to hear from you. What does discomfort looked like for you? I know we talked about the guilt and the shame piece. Does that resonate, or does it show up in different ways? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think for me, the number one thing would be guilt, specifically being disloyal to my current girlfriend. I think that is like the number one thing. And like it can go anything from making up, like, oh, what if you did this a year ago and I don't even remember the thing? It's impossible to know, to every day, like, you look at someone for 5 seconds and all of a sudden there's an influx of thoughts in your head. And then normally I would like text my girlfriend every single time something came in, which, I mean, that's a lot of text. And anything intrusive, I would text, and then she would reply. But as you can imagine, that's a lot for her. So that leads to a lot of discomfort between us. So then, that's why it's very helpful to kind of set boundaries and to realize that this is like not who you are. And also that it's okay, like, you're having these thoughts, but you don't have to engage with them. So I would say being disloyal, that's like the main thing. But then, really like taking a step back and trying to just recognize that, I mean, sometimes like the stuff that we talk about, it helps a lot of times, because like it kind of puts what a neurotypical individual does on the daily, just what the kind of OCD brain, quote unquote, kind of exaggerates and pumps into your head. But realistically, if you follow that kind of thinking, you wouldn't be able to look at anyone. You wouldn't be able to walk down the street. You wouldn't be able to leave your own house. And that's why it's causing all this significant impairment. So I think, it's just like at some point, it's also like, what is it even talking about? Yeah. So.
Oh, yeah. What is it even talking about? It just gets so extreme with everything we care about the most, whether it comes to faith, as we've talked about, or family, or girlfriend, or significant others. I know in the chat, we've talked about sexual themes and POCD. I mean, it literally latches on to everything that we could imagine. I always say OCD is really nasty ice cream that happens to come in a lot of different gross artificial flavors. Still the same nasty OCD ice cream, but it shows up in different ways just based on the stuff that's important to us. But we are not defined by those thoughts. And Phyllis, to you in the chat, you do not have to defend your existence at all. And I know that feels so hard and painful. And you are so worthy of living a beautiful life, not ridden with guilt and with shame, regardless of what OCD says. But I know that's really hard. I would love to, I can't believe it's been like almost an hour already, y'all. Y'all are so awesome. This has just been so fun. And I love learning about both of you. And I love the community learning about 2 of our new IOCDF advocates. You're the Baskin Robbins of OCD. Spence, I feel like that too. Like we have all the flavors here. They all mix and swirl together. There's some gross toppings. It's just, all the things. I would love to, well, I'm going to ask a random question along the lines of ice cream, and then we're going to close with some messages of hope. Because I did see at some point earlier, I believe Cash, who always joins us and has for years and years, Cash asked about ice cream flavors, which I usually do at the beginning somewhere and didn't for some reason. So I do want to ask real ice cream, not OCD ice cream. Jonathan, David, do y'all have favorite ice cream flavors?
David, you shook your head right away. I'm on the fence.
Butter pecan.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I'd have to go mint chocolate chip.
Okay. Mint chocolate chip. Very nice. Y'all are so much more interesting. I'm so boring. I'm vanilla, but with rainbow sprinkles. Okay. Has to have rainbow sprinkles. That's the That's the go-to. Okay. So I want to, so y'all don't leave us yet. We have a couple more minutes here because I want to ask both of our awesome advocates here, really some messages of hope. Especially as you kind of start this, you've both already been advocating in beautiful ways and you're advocating here tonight. But as you start this IOCDF advocate program with the IOCDF here, what message of hope would you like to leave with the community tonight? Maybe especially for anybody who's listening and trying to figure out, what does it mean for me to step forward in the midst of this guilt or shame? Or how do I start treatment? Or what does this look like? Can I even get better? Any words of hope that come to you? So I'll go to you, Jonathan. Any words of hope you want to leave folks with tonight?
Yeah, I go, and I won't take credit for it, but Marsha Linehan, founder of DBT, which I had great success with during my ERP. This is a life worth living. Mm-hmm. That quote rings in my head anytime I talk to, family or people. I've been fortunate enough. A lot of friends have opened up to me about their family members. I've been connected with people in the community, and my life is amazing. I'm truly blessed with the things I've been able to accomplish. And, some of it's probably due to the OCD. I'm a very driven person. So it's a life worth living. And another message of hope is something that my therapist and I have talked about. She once kind of stopped me in the middle of one of my, how horrible I did on something. And what if I in my thoughts of, worrying that I'm going to hurt somebody or sexually assault somebody, and that fear that you get. And she goes, I would love to just have everybody be a fly on the wall and hear what others deal with OCD. And I will tell you, each one of you will realize that you are amazing people. And I would trust you more than anybody because of how overcorrected you are in trying to be a good person. And I think that's the message of hope, that everybody I've met in this community at their heart is a good person. And that it's like we just have too much of trying to be good. So I think, to what you said about Phyllis, like, defending your existence. Yeah, we all feel like that, but your existence is awesome. I mean, that is my message of hope, that what we dealt with, and I'll put it on with what I mentioned, my daughter. My daughter is doing amazing. And I look at her awareness of emotions and the fact that she is so self-aware that I didn't have that because the community wasn't thriving like it is now. So there's support, there's resources, and it's a life worth living. That's my message of hope.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's so beautiful. And what you just said, I totally agree with. Even just spending time with you, Jonathan, tonight, and you, David, it's like, we haven't gotten to spend that much time together. And I'm just like, these are such amazing humans. I would literally trust y'all with, I was going to say with my kids. I don't have kids. With my cats, maybe, but
I can't. I'm allergic, and it wouldn't work out.
Sorry, Jonathan. But, yeah.
David, they're all yours.
Yeah, David's got it. But no, it really is. It's just the most awesome group of humans that we happen to see ourselves through this really distorted lens. And I love hearing, especially from therapists and from providers, it's like, no, we would trust people with these graphic, violent, sexual, intrusive thoughts more than anybody else. And I think that's so beautiful. So thank you, Jonathan. And David, we'd love to hear from you. Any messages of hope for the community?
Yeah, I think the main punchline is it'll be okay. I wish someone told me this sooner, because no matter where you are in your journey, whether you're in the beginning, in the middle, you're kind of, you finish therapy, you're in therapy. I think always just reminding yourself that, even if it's very tough right now, in the next 10 minutes, it'll be better if you sit through it. Maybe it won't be better, but it'll be better at some point. And trying to never give up, I think, is very important. And also just seeing that, OCD is like, as a condition, it has a very negative effect on many, but also it makes people stronger. When you get past, when you finish therapy, when you resist obsessions, you don't do compulsions, you feel empowered after doing that, because that's something you couldn't do this whole time. Like Jonathan said, some stuff kind of possibly drove him to some of his accomplishments. I'm also sometimes remembering certain things like in school is easier. I mean, I spend hours, but also the stuff that you remember from it is greater. So there's kind of always, it's kind of a double-edged sword at times, or all the time. I mean, there's always a good and bad side. And when you're in the throes of it, yes, it feels horrible. But when you get on the other side, there's always light in the darkness. So I think that's the take-home message. I have a tattoo of that saying on my leg. So I think that's the main thing. There's always light in the darkness. Yes.
Beautiful. Always light in the darkness. That's beautiful. That's one of my kind of favorite things to lean into with folks as well. Beautiful. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you everybody here in the chat with us tonight, and just so beautiful. And I want folks to know, Cash, I never know if you're kidding or you're not kidding, but if you are being serious, you are never too old for therapy. It is never too late to engage in treatment. Even with scrupulosity cases that I work on as a chaplain, I've worked with folks who are actually in their 90s, who are getting support with scrupulosity for the first time and who are reclaiming their lives. And so I just want you to know, never too late for that. Also want to thank Jack MHA for their support. And you can learn more about Jack MHA at jackmha.org. Thank you for sponsoring these live streams so that we continue to spread support and awareness for the community. And also want to note that the IOCDF is a donor-supported nonprofit organization. Please consider making a donation at iocdf.org/donate so that we can continue to have awesome programs like this with amazing advocates, and also continued in-person activities like the conference that so many of y'all just attended, and the virtual conference, and the upcoming walks this fall, and just so many awesome things. But in this moment, we thank you all so much for being here. We thank you, Jonathan and David, for sharing your stories, for being IOCDF advocates. We thank everyone in the chat for advocating, Emilio behind the scenes, and for always doing his digital magic and making us look like we know what we're doing here. But I'll end it with just thank you all. You are not alone. There is so much hope, and we are doing this together. We'll see you next time.